even because we have bias in all our content. The media has its own inherent bias. What gets covered has bias, right? So I think it's almost like you have to have a criteria for the AI to say, it's not just about where it takes the content, but how it evaluates the content. I literally had someone send me pictures of a mob with torches, and the message said, "We have long memory." I had a chance to ask the Dalai Lama a few questions, and I was just like, so how do you listen better? Essentially, it's like the problem is not to listen. The problem is you need to process. I made you hang up on your husband. That's I don't know how I feel about that. My claim to fame. Yeah.
Here we are. We've been talking for like 5 minutes, so we haven't really said much. You guys haven't hardly missed anything. We've been just talking about, the beginning of the world and all of that.
That's all. Yeah. And the secrets.
I don't know. Someone told me about you, but I'm thinking maybe it was one of the British people, maybe Mary Harrington, or I don't know, like who would it have been? Anyway, somebody told me, Katherine Brodsky. Okay, Katherine Brodsky. So then I looked you up and I thought, I don't know anything about Katherine Brodsky. She looks very interesting. It looks like she's doing all kinds of things, and she's been doing all kinds of things for quite a long time. And so I reached out to you and you said yes. And I'm like, I'm always just so shocked when somebody says yes, you'll talk to me. Oh, well, that's wonderful. So I still don't know very much about you, but that's what we're doing here today. So Katherine Brodsky, she's a renowned writer, commentator, and author of No Apologies, How to Find and Free Your Voice in an Age of Outrage. This is definitely becoming more and more and more an age of outrage. It never stops. It just gets weirder and weirder. So we can talk about whatever you want. With a decade-long correspondent tenure at Variety magazine, was that online or in print that you did that?
Both. It still is in both. But yeah, I've been writing about Hollywood and also the technical side of it as well for over 10 years now. It's one of my longest
probably the demise of Hollywood too, and all of the controversies that have come out of there in the last while, right?
Well, definitely about just the technological developments and what's that's doing.
Oh, so the AI that has come out. Oh, very interesting. I've never talked about any of that. I'm curious.
I love talking about AI. Actually, it's become a passion. A passionate interest point of mine, I guess.
I guess the only part of it that I've really investigated is more chatbots. And that's fascinating, what you can ask a question and then just get, what was I doing? Oh, I know. I was commenting on Proverbs. That's what I was doing. I was trying to understand Proverbs. So I was taking a little bit of a proverb and I was putting it in this chatbot. And this chatbot was designed on the Bible. So it had what I needed inside it. And then it would just ream out this really long thing. And then I'd put in another thing. And then pretty soon I had a book to read about this.
It was explaining the Bible to you?
Or explaining the Bible to me, explaining what this little thing meant from this angle and this angle and this angle. It was really useful, more useful than anything I've ever seen. So I can't imagine in all the ways that AI can be useful in more ways than we've ever thought of.
Both useful and problematic. And I think one issue that we have with technology is that we go full blast and it's exciting. I mean, I'm very interested in it. I'm a huge, avid supporter and follower of especially emerging technologies. But often what happens is that we put the horse before the cart. So we make it and then we start thinking about all the problems that it's going to cause instead of concurrently doing that. And so even with something like these chat apps and things like that, those are, most people are familiar with them because they're consumer facing and they can be used in some really fascinating ways. And I think they can better us as humans because they can give expression to things that maybe we don't have certain skills, but we can combine ourselves with that power of access to all data not wisdom, but data.
Mm-hmm.
And we can do some incredible things, but also, where is it getting this data, how it's processing it, how much of it is it making up, which is not an insignificant amount. Those are all challenges that we're going to have to face. And I've been talking a little bit about how with,
Well, you just
you
saw
know,
Elon Musk, didn't you?
yeah, I did. I interviewed Elon Musk, yeah,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
on his platform, and I've been also toying with Grok, which is his
Oh, right.
AI on the platform. It's fascinating because it knows a lot. Like the way that Grok does things is different from ChatGPT in terms of like the access to user data on the X platform. So it
Mm-hmm,
knows me a lot better than other platforms do,
mm-hmm,
which is kind of creepy because it can be used as a tool in a way where it's like a social credit system,
mm-hmm.
but not with the government implementing it, but rather corporations. And it's almost definitely going to be used that way because you can say, hey, let's ask, what does Catherine think about, I don't know, the environment? What does Catherine think? What's her stance on issue X and Y? What's her political orientation? And it will score you based on,
Great.
how much it aligns with the company, right? So that could be one way that I see it being used. But also, just for search results, I think all our search engines are going to end up becoming essentially, instead of Googling keywords, you're going to ask a question. And often it will give you a really good answer really quickly. And it's a great thing, right? On the one hand. But even with search engines, they're already imperfect. Like if you go on Google, which is obviously the most dominant search engine, it doesn't show you all search results. It hides a lot of things. It gives different scores to different websites. Some of it makes sense. Like, for example, if a lot of people link to this particular article, it's going to show up higher in the algorithm. And the more credibility the entities linking to it have, the more it's going to rise. And that makes sense. But then sometimes it doesn't. And I've noticed vanishing results. But the great thing about search engines is that at least when you look up the information, you know where it came from, you know who wrote it, you know everything about it, versus on something like ChatGPT, it won't cite its sources, right?
Right.
There's some that do, but a lot of them don't. And so you have no idea how it arrived at that answer. So if you're relying on it for your understanding of the world, you could be very easily misled. So things like that are things that do trouble me, I guess, in terms of our leaping into the future. As much as I love playing with these ChatGPT bots and
I
those
was
kinds of
talking
things.
to a woman who's a psychologist, but she does cyber crime. And so she was talking about the dark web, which is kind of what you're alluding to, is that Google will bring you up answers, but it won't tell you everything that it's brought up. It'll decide what to put on top and what to show you later and what not to show you at all. And I was thinking how on the high, because I was thinking of the dark web as the high seas, as pirates on the high seas. And I was thinking, because that's kind of just what it made me think of, is like, wow, it's a lawless place. It's a lawless place. And what wins? The ship with the biggest, smartest crew and the biggest guns on the ship.
That's a great way of looking at it because I was thinking about it. Somebody brought up 4chan, which is this very, if you're going to look at absolute free speech,
Mm-hmm.
that's a wild, wild west out there. And it's not a pleasant experience for most sane human beings versus, on the one hand, because obviously my book is a lot about freedom of speech. And so I look into that a lot. And I value that a lot. But when we build systems in which we operate, so like social media platforms, we can't, if we do this like anything goes kind of dimension, then anything goes. This is going to be a very terrible user experience. And so then we start to get into, okay, well, we have to curate things a little bit. And that's where it becomes complicated because then it becomes a pretty subjective way of doing things. And even in the book, like, my belief isn't that you have to agree and allow every kind of speech. You can allow it, but disagree with it. And you don't have to invite certain people over if you really don't like them as human beings. But I do want to see a little bit more tolerance, a little bit more openness into exploring ideas with which you disagree. And that's more what I advocate for. And then I've been thinking a lot about, how do you create a more objective framework for social media and these kinds of contexts? How do you not suppress the ideas themselves or take them into consideration, but maybe more so focusing on how they are expressed? You know, if I'm just yelling at you and providing no data and I'm just being rude, like, what value does that person provide? Probably not that much. And so maybe I'm less likely to engage with that person versus someone who has a completely different idea than me about the world, but is arguing it in good faith, is in using ad hominem attacks, is citing information. So how do you build sort of almost like a checklist so that your subjectivity and your emotion about certain topics doesn't interfere in the way of communicating with people who see the world differently?
We used to have bibliographies, like you said, right? We used to have to say where we got our information from, and that's just been blown out of the water. I don't know how often anybody has to do that unless they're doing a master's or a PhD in something.
Nothing. And in journalism, which obviously I've been working in for 15 years, I mean, honestly, as somebody who hated citing things because of the grunt work that it involved when I did my university degree, I was like, oh, great, I don't have to cite anything. That seems weird, but okay. And you don't cite anything in journalism unless you're citing some breaking information. You say where you got that from. But there's very little citation, especially if it's anything that's like a publicly known thing. But also in social media, I've been advocating for years now for because you're actually discouraged from sharing and from where you got information from, because the way that platforms like X and other platforms as well are set up is that if you link to something, it actually hurts your post. So nobody links to anything because they don't want to. And I understand that. So instead, I think you should have citations. And I think that will improve the experience on that platform so much, because people will have some accountability and they'll build trust too. Because if you're, even if it should be a voluntary thing, I'm not going to make people do it. But if people who do that, they're going to earn trust from their followers because they respect them enough to share their work with them. They respect them enough to say, hey, you can look at this source for yourself. This is where I got the information. And it has better discourse because maybe that information is flawed. Then people can comment and say, hey, you know, they got this wrong in this article, or they in this study or whatnot, right? Like that would be a much better. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is a good idea. And those are the kind of things we should probably be thinking about now, because we have a deluge of information and we have no way to curate it. And we have to figure out what that is. And, you know, part of this online bot problem is, where do they get their information from when they're giving you the answers to your question? Where does that all come from? And people say, oh, you know, well, you know, they kind of take everything from the web. It's like, yeah, maybe they do, but maybe there's a little more from this area and a little less from this area, and then all of a sudden,
well, what has
biased.
been published, right? Like the data sets that it's using, of course, they're going to have a level of bias, even because we have bias in all our content. You know, the media has its own inherent bias. What gets covered has bias, right? So there's no, you know, so I think it's almost like you have to have a criteria for the AI to say, it's not just about where it takes the content, but how it evaluates the content. It's like, is this content, you know, does it only take pure facts from the content, and how do you do that? And it's really complicated, and I understand why there's mistakes that are happening. Some of them, you know, people are so quick to jump on, but it's not always even intentional. And then they try to fix it, and it's not that easy because they don't, as a lot of people working in the field say, there's a lot that they don't even understand about how it processes the information that it does. But one thing I wanted to note is ultimately we have more access to information or content than ever, right? In the past, you would have had to read many books to just even get a specialized piece of information. It was very, very difficult. And so on the one hand, we live in this heyday of information, and you can find pretty much anything you're interested in, which is fantastic. And on the other hand, people are under the impression that they know more than they do, because what they're doing is that they're reading surface level things instead of, in the past, even if you read a book on a subject, right, just even one book, that author had to go to such lengths. And yes, there's gatekeepers and all of that. You can look at it as a bad thing or a good thing. On the positive, that took a standard to get published. Mm-hmm. And there was a vetting process, and it took a very long time. And the person was probably, somebody who's dedicated a significant amount of their life to learning the subject. So you're getting a deeper understanding of something. Whereas right now, people are going out on the internet and they can find anything, but they're getting very surface levels of information, and they get a little bit here, a little bit there. And often they look for things that they already agree with anyways. And I think it creates this illusion of knowledge where it's really just information that they have, selective information. And, and then the last piece of that is going to be wisdom, which I think wisdom comes from not knowing things, but living things, and sort of being able to look at a piece of information or different pieces of information through the lens of your experience, and then be able to make some sort of a deduction based on that. So I think we're in information overload, but knowledge, deficiency.
So why are you interested in all this stuff, do you think? Why'd you go this direction? People have asked you that, I'm sure, so you must have thought that through.
It's funny. I haven't been asked that.
Oh, no?
No, I haven't been asked that.
Did you came to Canada? You said when you were 12. That's when you came.
Yeah.
And so your interests were formed largely in the West. But they weren't completely formed in the West because you came from Russia. So that was the beginnings of things. So I think some of the reasons that I do things came from the time I was like 5 years old and stuff. So they were, there are things that happened early in my life that now I say, oh yeah, now I see why I've become more interested in this and that. It's because this thing happened back then when I thought, why? And that just took me in a direction. So I wonder what happened and why you're in the direction that you are.
Yeah, so for me, it is a combination of things. I think it's not just the experiences that I had as a child. So I was born in Ukraine and what was then the Soviet Union, and grow up speaking Russian. And then I lived in Israel as well. So I kind of went to interesting places before arriving in Canada. So I think, of course, that had to have a massive influence on me. And it's interesting how you look at things. Sometimes you have no idea why you are the way you are. And then one day it sort of clicks. So it's funny that you were saying how, you only figure out things in retrospect. Sometimes you have this like epiphany of like, oh, this is why I feel the way that I do. It's because of this experience in your youth. So it's funny because I've had a lot of moments lately like that. And one of which being, I feel super awkward dancing, moving in my physical body. And then I realized it all came down to this one experience that I had. I was in ballet as a child, and as many kids are, but mine was the Royal Ballet Academy of London. So it was a very strict program, and I loved dancing. I was very free. And then I had this one really awful teacher, and she really humiliated me and made me feel self-conscious. And after that, that's how I was. But I didn't really attribute that until it clicked. It just kind of came back as visual. It was really fascinating. But for me, in terms of growing up, I think being an immigrant makes a really big difference. I think people who are immigrants have massive commonalities. One, you always feel like a little bit of an outsider. And so you take an outsider perspective. You're a little fly on the wall, no matter how much you try to fit in. And I very much tried to fit in. And then the other part of it is I always had this real value for freedom. So to me, the West represented freedom, whether it is to create things and function within, a system where, like, yes, if you learn things, if you try to make something, you have the opportunity. You're not going to necessarily be struck down just because, in my case, in my family, being Jewish was written on the passport, not the passport, the citizenship and your documents. So people knew, and you couldn't go into certain fields. But also the suppression of speech was obviously a very, very significant aspect. And my family talked about that quite a lot. And we really valued the West for its freedoms. You don't have to agree with the way that other people live, but, the idea that you should give them the space to do so as long as they don't hurt anybody else was something that really resonated with us. And then, what started happening is that my family started noticing certain similarities creeping in terms of, like, echoes from their past in the Soviet
What kind
Union.
of things? Can you think of anything that?
Yeah, the control of language, for example, that some words are acceptable and others are not, that the way that certain things were spun in the media, and stories were being misrepresented. It's actually kind of funny. One of my gateways into understanding these changes, because I was in a bit of denial, I would say, for a while. I didn't think I could see some of these issues, but I never thought that this creep could get so big. I didn't think that in the West, I think often you feel pretty safe where you are and you don't think that big changes can happen. But then you have to think historically, like Germany was a pretty democratic place where a lot of different nationalities would come. It was pretty liberal. And yet it changed. And there's many other places, like if you look at Iran, if you look at photos of Iran from a different, 40 years ago, completely different place. And so changes can and do happen, including very big oppressive changes. So that's something that I became more aware of, but I was in denial originally. And even with your husband, Jordan, he was a little bit of a gateway for me in some ways, because when I first heard of his story being covered, I really thought, I just took it as what it was, what it was being said about him. Like, okay, this bigoted professor. I've always been someone very supportive of people's rights, gay, trans, whatever. So I just, honestly, I took it as that. I just didn't look into it. And then I don't know why, but I decided to start looking into it because I was just curious. And so when I saw what was actually said and that it was about compulsive speech, and also I was listening to lectures of his, I realized the way that he was being portrayed was not at all what was true. And so I think that little exposure actually had a lot more impact than one might think, because I started looking into a lot more stories like that. And
Is that when you started writing your book?
No. So when I started writing my book, is I had, I was thinking a lot of these like cancellations of people because of things they might have said or done that seemed, maybe, not that bad, not bad enough to destroy somebody's life.
Yeah.
And then I had my own experience with it, which I'm sure you've read in the book. But essentially,
what year was that? I can't remember what year that was.
That was just about 3 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, which I think was kind of the height of all of this stuff happening too. Yeah, and for me, So just for your listeners, what had happened was basically I ran a group for women journalists who, and it was a job board, and it was an offshoot of another group. So that's why it was for women, because it was an offshoot. And all it was is jobs. And then one of the people who was a member, she posted a job opportunity, and that job opportunity happened to be at Fox News, which did not go over with a lot of the members. And they started this massive pile-on, just really like horrible personal attacks. And I felt like it was my responsibility as the group founder to step in. And so I did. And I thought I had posted a pretty PC kind of thing, which was basically, hey, let's just stay away from personal attacks and keep politics out of this. This is a job that's focused on jobs, a group that's focused on jobs, not politics. And we've come apart so much over the last few years. Let's just stick together. That's all I said. And that was met with just an extreme reaction that I did not predict. It is funny to me because when I talk to people about it, they actually can predict what was going to happen. But to me, I guess I was pretty naive still. And so the pylon, there were people calling me KKK, that I'm a white supremacist, that I'd just as soon let the KKK recruit from my board and all that kind of stuff. And at the time, I believed in engaging with them too. I've changed my mind. And the other thing that it then sort of escalated further because they said, well, you can't take politics out of the group because it's a job board for women and thus it is inherently political. It's not how I saw things. And also I didn't want politics in the group. So I said, okay, then I'll open it up for everyone. That one I did know would get some reactions. Although I thought I was being very fair because I said, I'll open it up for, I'll let people stick around for a month before I change this. If you want to start a group with the same name, I'll give you the name and I'll promote the group and I'll change my name. So it was actually I thought I was very accommodating. They didn't think that. So there was this massive outrage and people just sent me threats. They tried to reach out to employers so they would never hire me again, harass me on social media, voted down all my content. I was on a panel and somebody just interrupted, started talking about that. I had somebody sent me, I always bring this one up, but it's the most memorable. I literally had someone send me pictures of a mob with torches. And the message said, we have long memories. So it was on that level. And now I can sort of look back and laugh about it but at the time it felt actually, I've kind of come to realize that it was much more traumatic than I tried to portray it as at the time because I was dealing with it. But the other thing that came off of it, and this is really what's led to the book, because I probably would never have written the book otherwise, is that other people were sending me messages of support. And some of these messages would say things like, I see what's happening to you and it's wrong and I disagree with it and you don't deserve it. But I'm so afraid to speak up and I'm so ashamed. Mm-hmm. And the other kinds of messages I was getting is people sharing their own stories of being harassed, canceled. And by the way, never, people hear stories like mine because we were able to sort of persevere, but a lot of people haven't. Mm-hmm. And so I felt, again, I felt a certain personal responsibility to try and tell some of these stories and bring the issue to the forefront. And the first thing, though, I did was I wrote a piece for Newsweek. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was an opinion piece. It was my first opinion piece ever. I wrote features and, interviews. I didn't get involved in this stuff. Mm-hmm. And that piece I thought was going to destroy my life, my career, certainly. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, I was preparing myself. I was like, okay, if I can't be employed again, what am I going to do? Like, maybe I'll buy a little coffee shop or something. I was trying to figure out how to survive. But I genuinely at the time thought that was it because now I'm drawing more attention to it. If you read it now, it's like, okay, that article wasn't anything that should have been that controversial. But I wrote about my experiences, but more so I wrote about the society and how how people are so intolerant towards each other and how they engage in what is essentially bullying behavior. When you really, get to the root of it, it's bullying. That's all it
They're
is.
hunting. They're hunting each other. They're
They
hunting them
are.
down.
And this was
Yeah.
happening a lot in these groups. So
Mm.
I wrote that. And then from that, I decided to write a book.
I don't think it's any wonder that was tricky. Anybody thinks, okay, you put your name, you decide that you're the author of that. How are you going to feel? But when you put your name there. That means everyone who knows you knows you wrote that. And so then you're judged, and because you're being judged, then you wonder who else is going to judge you. So it's no wonder it causes questions.
Judgment is
And
the worst. People are most scared, I think, as much as people are scared of other things or, losing their jobs. I think the amount of value we put on the judgment of on somebody's judgment and the fear that we have dealing with that. I mean, social
well, to
anxiety,
be
shame,
outed from the group, that must be, if you imagine
huge.
that within the group you have nutrition and a warm place to sleep. Outside the group, you have no food and nowhere warm to sleep. It's no wonder.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I would say because I still don't belong to any kind of group.
Right, right. And I think more people are like finding themselves there, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I've noticed that a lot of people who find themselves in my shoes end up gravitating towards another, let's say, political group. I haven't done that. I've expanded my horizons in the sense of like I will talk to a lot of different people, but at the same time, I guess it's that loner thing that I had or that outsider that I was
Mm.
always as an immigrant. I think that just reinforced that more for me. And my views are so across all spectrums, like, and really truly across like anything from socialism to definitely some conservatism as well. Um, it's There is no one group that will sort of take me where I feel like a sense of belonging, even more importantly. So you feel like, I think Bridget Fetisi, if you know her, but she calls it
I
being
don't know
politically
her.
homeless. Oh, she's great. She's a
Oh, I'll look
comedian
her
and
up.
very outspoken herself. But she kind of been using that a lot, is politically homeless. And I think that's a pretty good way to say it, or just homeless. I think we look at things way too much in the context of politics, anyways. I think that's what's causing a lot of this stuff too, because then it becomes about teams and instead of ideas. I want people to look at everything and look, okay, what's the best idea here? What's going to hurt the least people and benefit the most people? And that's kind of how I tend to look at every policy, except for I definitely have some emotional attachments to ideas like, personal freedoms would be one, that somebody else might value the benefit of the collective over the individual. And that's a different way of looking at the world. I don't think we can really argue that. I think it's just we're
Well, and I wonder
aligned
too,
differently.
because you have interest that goes from journalism, which is pretty group political, and then to art, which is very individual, not so group oriented. Maybe. What do you think of
Well,
that?
it's interesting because for me, my interest in journalism was always fueled by curiosity rather than, say, politics or
Uh-huh.
wanting to spread a particular message. In particular, I mean, I didn't really write political things until recently. I still don't consider them political, but they're commentary, social commentary, I guess.
Hmm.
But in the past, I've written really things where I'm like, I'm curious. I want to have a conversation with a person. Or I want to learn more about this thing. So it was never motivated by me wanting to share a particular story, minus like stories that I thought, oh, I came across this story. It's interesting. People should know about this because it'd be
Right.
interesting to them, right? Not because I was trying to persuade them
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
any direction. But journalism today, that's where I see the fundamental change, because my view and my approach wasn't unique when I was starting out in journalism. Most of my editors, I mean, if anything, where they made me better as a writer, it's pushing me to, not let in my own biases or just take
Hmm.
something at surface level and kind of, explain, put things in proper context. versus, today I definitely, very proudly, people proclaim that they are activist journalists, really. So their view is that they are not driven really by curiosity. They're driven by wanting to spread a certain message to help their cause,
Yeah.
and those causes could be helpful or not. But that becomes a very subjective experience, not driven by curiosity at all.
I was thinking just to mention in Canada, and you lived there for a while, so you might have known this person, but he's elderly now. He's a journalist. His name is Rex Murphy. Rex
I am aware of him. I don't know him, but I'm aware of him. Yeah.
Oh, he was, he kept the fires burning always in Canada. He was always asking the questions like, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? What are we doing here? And people didn't like it because he pushed them all the time to pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And he never affiliated with anyone.
Really?
No, he didn't. He said if he affiliated with someone and he had to ask them a question, then he couldn't ask them the question. So he couldn't get too close to anybody. Otherwise, he didn't have the separations. It couldn't become subjective. It had to stay objective for him. So he was very close to his sister, his brother, his nephews. Like he had a family and a close family. He still does. He has very, very close family, but he never associated himself really even with friendships in a close manner. Because what if one of those friends, he needed to ask him a question? So he just kept everybody distant. I thought, wow, that's quite a sacrifice. But that he said he thought that was journalism.
Yeah, and I think that's very hard to do, and I think most people don't do it these days. And you're right. I mean, even one of the people who was in my book, completely non-political, but John Patrick Shanley, our conversation was more about the role of free expression in art, and to him, like, you can't be a true artist if you can't tell the truth, and you can't tell the truth if you're thinking about whether something might hurt somebody else's feelings. That's a very hard place to get to. I mean, sounds like Rex Murphy is kind of in that space.
Yeah.
For me, it's something that I really struggle with. But he's right, because there's a lot of constraints on you then as an artist or as a storyteller. If you are thinking, man, that's going to hurt someone, you shouldn't do things with the intention of hurting someone. But if you're telling the truth and in the process it does. Now, if you don't need that bit of information, that's a different thing.
That's a different
But if you do, yeah, and I've definitely been thinking about that a fair bit, because I also write some creative things, and I know that I think I'm getting freer in some sense when it comes to these things, but I'm still shackled in the sense that I certainly think about. So I don't care as much about what the general public thinks or what people on the left or the right think. I don't really care. But I do care what my family thinks, for example, or my closest friends. That might be something that it's still too difficult for me to fully unshackle from. And maybe I never will, but I can see the value in that, especially as somebody who's writing, John in particular writes like very personal, very sort of over the top things sometimes. And if he cared about how, I don't know, his mother would find that, that would absolutely limit his creativity in a way that I think would make him a very different storyteller to who he is. And that's what makes him so incredibly compelling, is that he has that absolute freedom to just, whether it's talking about somebody or it's about, just painting a character who's maybe supremely unlikable and or saying something that's so outrageous. And if we can't do that, I mean, this is why I think a lot of art is sort of far less compelling than I used to find it. A lot of filmmaking, it's much more crippled by people's opinions, and including people, if you're in a writer's room, what do other writers think? Is somebody going to be offended? Are people going to think well of you? And then you take a show like, what is it called? He mentions it in the book.
You think that people are actually doing that? They're not making art that they would like
Yeah.
to make because it's not going to fit in with the narrative that people are accepting right
I
now?
know that that's what's happening,
Oh,
and it's
that's
happening
terrible.
because I've talked to enough people to know that that's what's happening. So,
Yeah.
people will create projects that are just bait, because they
Yeah.
know those are more likely to get funded or picked up, and
Oh,
because
right.
they
Of
are
course,
socially
funding.
aligned.
That's the
Yeah,
problem with that funding, you know. It's the
funding is
marketing
a
and the government funding that are really
Yeah, I
twisting
mean,
things.
journalism, I mean, people think bias is a big leader of some of the issues, but actually, while it plays a role, the financial incentives, I would argue, play a greater role than the models. But yeah, I've also talked to friends of mine who work on, in the film industry, and they specifically have said to me either a certain work that has been life changing wouldn't get made today, or two, they've had the experience of being in a writer's room and having fellow writers voice being offended. And that had a very chilling effect. And even when it doesn't happen to you specifically, you know that it happens. So you
Hmm.
watch yourself.
Right.
And part of art, I think, is sometimes being offensive or saying the wrong thing by accident because you want to explore and play with ideas. It's not because I don't think somebody's goal should be like to hurt somebody's feelings intentionally or to like well, sometimes you want it to offend because you're trying to make a point, right?
Hmm.
But you need to be able to play and explore and have safety with that. This is where I kind of think now it sort of triggered this thought of, well, with my closest friends, I can say pretty much anything and not worry about that. And the reason that I can is they have goodwill towards me, where they understand me as a human and they know that I don't intend bad things. They understand where I'm coming from, and that they know who I am as a human being. And there's that grace and understanding,
Hmm.
which we don't give to other people. And it's understandable you don't know them, but people are too quick to assume the worst in each other. And I think that's part of what's kind of driving some of the social, especially with social media, because it's so easy to just dehumanize someone. They would never say, almost none of the people, what they've said to me, whether
Hmm.
it in the past or now, over some of the things that I talk about. I don't think anyone would have said that to me, or hardly anyone would ever say that to me in person.
Right. Right. Well, even the things that have been said to my husband, that just never happens in person. You know, people
Hmm.
come up to him and they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for all of the hate that comes your way," and it's like, it's all online. It's all online. 99.9% of it is online. We've met. We can count them on one hand in all the traveling we've done that we've met someone in person, and often they were drunk. You know,
Yeah.
through Dublin, we saw some woman. She was pretty drunk. So, I mean, what are you going to say about that? Whatever she said, she was drunk. And another guy, but out of the thousands of people, and you have one or two, like it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It's online. It's an online phenomena. And I was thinking, today in the car, this was kind of a random thought, but it kind of spooked me. And I thought, well, people have probably already thought of that, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I was thinking about my point of view of, I guess, radically left policies. Um, I'm an artist, right? I'm a painter. I'm a portrait artist. I like to make sculptures out of clay. I'm not very good at making pots on a wheel because I can't center them very well. But I like making jewelry. I mean, really, I like doing lots of things. I like to sing. I mean, I like lots of arts, right? And so I'm usually very open to all kinds of people because it takes all kinds of people. But this political trouble that we're in right now is dividing us all. And so they've taken terms like trans, and they've weaponized the word so that now you're either pro trans or anti trans, and there is no and you have to be either 100% for or 100% against. There's no nuance. in the conversations anymore. And so all these people, these normal people, maybe they're creative, they maybe had a point of view before, but it was nuanced. And like you said, you've had your time of being part of all kinds of communities. And so have I. But I think, all of this politicization of everything, it's like it had to create for this party or this party, this political party or this political party. And you can't be one and the other. You have to be one or the other. And so that means that now we can't, it's hard to wed those things again. It's hard to bring those people back together again because they've been politicized. They've been put in camps. They've been put in camps, and they all have their team colors on, and now we have our weapons and we're ready. It's just crazy.
No, I completely agree with you. And it makes it much more difficult to approach these topics. And I would say this has happened both on the right and left, because I spend no time with both significantly. So but for example, if you take the trans topic, so yes, there is this vilification. Like I was terrified of speaking about that particular topic for a very long time. Probably still am. But I do now.
Loud.
Yeah. Well, because you have, again, what it is the voices of a very dominant, very domineering minority. It's not a large group of people. They're extremists, and they will go after people. And then other people are so fearful of them that they cower in silence. So the more reasonable, nuanced perspectives are then not heard. Because if you talk about if you talk to people in person on the left about this particular issue, even if you talk to some trans people, or a lot of trans people, they will actually have deeply nuanced views that are actually not that different from people on the right, or, whatever they're calling the feminists, reactionary feminists, I think they're called. And then on the right, what happens is that there is such a hysteria over it, and it's rooted in something real, but it is the way that conversation goes is pretty awful at times. And you have people who are like more reasonable, again, nuanced. They also don't really engage in it that much. It's more the people who are more extreme. So all that one side hears is these extreme, like people who hate trans people, or that at least that's how it comes across. Yeah. And then on the other hand, so you basically have then the more sensible group of people who could actually have a conversation together and come to some agreement. They're so afraid of being associated with each other that they don't have conversations. And that is very sad, because ultimately our goal should be to protect people, right? We want to give people maximum liberty if they're adult. Well, at least that's my belief. I want to give people maximum liberty as adults to make their own choices, but without external pressures or being forced into things. And then you want to protect the vulnerable. So whether it's somebody's vulnerable because of mental susceptibility or their children, then you want to try and make the right choices for them. Maybe there isn't an exact agreement of what that right choice is, but there's a lot of overlap. You see this on other issues too, like abortion. If you really talk to people that are just more sensible, not extremists, not activists on either side, you're going to actually find an agreement pretty easily. I think most people are going to they might not be absolutely happy with where we land, but they'll be okay. They'll be satisfied enough that they would agree. And we could actually have solutions that don't separate people. But instead you have, like you said, teams playing at each other, but it's not just the teams. It's really the team captains, I guess, in a way, right, to use the metaphor, who are loud, aggressive, intimidating, don't represent nuance, and they kill nuance, and they kill any potential of positive resolutions. Yeah. And when you go to societies where there's one really important thing for society to be healthy, in my view, is for them to be able to acknowledge when something isn't working. Mm-hmm. And be easily to change their minds, not just stick to something because they've implemented it. Right. And that's not happening in our society, unfortunately. but it does happen in other societies. So what I want to do is like study those societies more and be like, okay, why, what do we need to create that environment where we're able to try something? Maybe that was the wrong thing to try. Okay, let's figure that out. First of all, admit that that was the wrong thing to try, which will
Yes.
only establish more trust from people who might have disagreed with you. And then, pursue other solutions.
Have you found any other places that you think things are going better in and see a difference in how their societies are being run?
I mean, I feel like I haven't. I'm in the process of trying to study some of these more. I might have something with a next book.
Okay.
But
You think you'll write again? Will you write again?
Yeah, the funny thing is, when I was writing this book, I thought I barely got through it. I almost abandoned it like several times. I struggled. And then I just finished it and then immediately came up with 2 more ideas that I want to do. So
Yeah. That's funny. When I was drawing some drawings and I drew 10 of them and I thought, well, that's enough of that, whatever I'm doing, I liked it, but that's enough. I'm done. And then I didn't do anything. And then I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. And one day I was downtown and I saw this place that did this cool kind of framing a drawing where it was just metal it was 2 pieces of glass and metal all around, soldered with little hoops on the edges where you'd put nails in, and then you could just put this drawing with a very thin piece of metal all around and put it on the wall. And they didn't stick out far, so you could always, if you had them in the bookshelf, they'd line up real nice, and so it seemed efficient, and you could see the whole drawing, and it would keep the dust off it and everything. You could wipe it down. I thought this is good. So I went there and I took all my drawings there. I dropped them off there. I came home and I started working. I thought, oh, I wasn't done. I thought I was done, but I had to frame them. I didn't know that. So sometimes you think you're done something and you can't understand why you can't do the next thing. It's because, maybe you got to look around. Maybe you're not quite done. You thought you were done. Maybe you're not quite done. I didn't know what it was that was stopping me. That was interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes you think, well, I've learned this because I have a tendency to go, I'm lazy, right? Like I say, I'm lazy. And it was pointed out to me that if I was indeed lazy, I wouldn't have done all the different things that I have.
Yeah.
And that made me sort of reflect. So this person noted that maybe it's not that I'm lazy, it's that I don't want to do a particular thing. And it's like, why do I not want to do it? And there's so many different reasons. Sometimes it's not the right time. Sometimes it's like you're afraid of failure. Sometimes you're afraid of success. You often are afraid. We are often quite afraid of success.
Oh, yeah, that stopped me from doing lots of things.
Yeah. Well, it's true because even with certain success, like your life changes, or you're more committed. Like there's a big project that I want to do that I think I'm pretty passionate about. I do want to do it. And I think I have access to funding for it. And yet I've been delaying it. Why? Because if it goes ahead, now I have so many people depending on me, including investors, but also people I might employ. I have a huge endeavor. It's only going to grow. It's only going to get more complicated. It's going to be difficult, and it is going to keep me from doing some other things that I might want to do. So all of these things play a role. Because it's not, I'm not even afraid of failing at it. I'm actually afraid of succeeding at it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Didn't you we were going to have a podcast earlier and then you delayed it because you were going to go on set?
I did.
Were you filming something? Is that what you were doing?
Yeah, I was working on a movie, but mostly like producing content. And it was fun. It was like an action comedy. Fun? Yeah. And good people. I really enjoyed it because the people were great. And it was it's funny because I went on the project thinking I'm not really going to have any conversations, that I was just going to keep my head down and do my work.
Yeah.
But it didn't quite go that way. But people, that's the thing. Again, I think people tend to think that those on the left or those who work in film are just these, super virtue signaling evil people, whatever.
Right.
And it's just not reality. And, I've had experiences where I disagreed with someone pretty strongly and she's pretty feisty, but it was all a positive experience. We just kind of went back and forth, and other things we agreed on. And then with other people, we had, some people surprised me because maybe I assumed that they have a particular stance on something where they actually don't. And unless we talk to people, and particularly if we do it in person, we
In
don't
person.
really have a sense. Yeah.
I
We
think
don't know
it's in
what's going
person.
on.
Yeah.
It's so important. I think these social media platforms, like going back to the start of our conversation,
Yeah.
and, the way that things are being designed in a way where we're not thinking about the human consequences to them. That's social media. I was naive to that because the way I was using social media was to just kind of monitor the conversations that were interesting to me. I'd follow some people would kind of see what I sound like, so they build some trust. I was using it in pretty positive ways, I think. And I didn't understand the negative consequences overall. And I think it's had a profoundly negative consequence on so many levels. It didn't have to. It also has positive things, right? People connect. Some people meet in person. You get a sense, you are able to communicate certain ideas. But the way that they're designed, they're not humanity centric.
Right.
So the reason that you lose that reason why when, people come up to your husband, most of the time they're not going to be rude or mean or jerks, right? It's going to be pretty positive engagement. And so you lose that in social media platforms. I don't think you necessarily have to. I think it can be done in a way where it retains our humanity for sure.
Well, I think, when it used to be all in person, there used to be people who would kind of monitor the dynamics that were going on in the room. And that's not done anymore. Everybody has the same voice. Doesn't matter how knowledgeable they are, or even how, it matters a little bit how introverted they are, because they might not say anything if they're too introverted. But in terms of knowledge and status, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter online. So all of those norms are wiped away. And so now we don't have a way to organize ourselves. Because I used to think, men organize themselves, so they put one guy on top. He used to be the hunter. He used to be the head hunter, and he, not the head hunter, but he would go out and he would hunt first. And when he came back, he would share everything with everybody, because he would line up the hunt, but all these other guys would like surround the animal and everything, and like they'd take down whatever they were taking down as a group. But there would be this one guy who was leading everything, but he would know to share with everyone, because the next time he went out, he might not be the one to shoot, and he would want everyone else to share with him. And but they would organize themselves so they knew who was the most who has the sharpest eye would be on top, and whoever was like the fastest runner probably would also be on top. But then the guys that were that were thorough and not going to give up and were making sure it moved along, maybe they would be pushing forward, so the pack, but they would have their guys set up like that. And then now we've got women and men in the same scenario, and the hierarchy doesn't work the same way anymore, because, well, where are you going to put these men that used to form themselves like that? And they put each other in those places, and they only did it when it was only men. This is very interesting to me. And
That's interesting, but I wonder if it's a part of that could be replaced, and this is what I think
I
we're
wonder.
lacking so much, is community. Because I think a lot of the issues that we're seeing, increase in mental health issues, we're seeing this disconnect, social media, a lot of that is, to me, and I hear people write to me all the time saying how lonely they are. I used to write back a lot,
Yeah.
realize there's no way I can do that. But but a
It's
lot of
lonely
people are,
online, boy. You got to get
it's
offline
lonely because
if you're
well,
lonely.
it's
Go
lonely
outside and
offline.
say hello, man.
Well, people feel like they are rejected from society, and why this made me think, like, because you're talking about this pyramid. So what these people were doing, there's the leaders at the top, and then you've got these supporting characters, and the leader should care about the supporting characters. Now, in the hunter gatherer kind of scenario, part of that is because that's essential to their self interest too. But in society, like if we had societies that value everybody, even if you have leaders, you have the people who invent things, you have the people who are leaders of corporations, but you cannot run that society without the supporting players either.
Hmm.
So if you had a society that understood that better and valued these people more, yes, the garbage men that collect your garbage, the people who fix your sink, I mean,
The
they
secretaries,
run the world, right?
everybody.
And we don't, the secretaries, like, we don't value that. And I think part of that could be tied into community. And if we think of ourselves as both individuals and as being part of a group, then we would make people feel more included, who are in this other dynamic of the pyramid. And people wouldn't be, I mean, people are literally dying of loneliness.
Yeah. Well, housewives, they are not valued. They're not valued
yeah.
in any way. And that's partly why we're not having babies anymore, is because, well, who wants to be a housewife at home? It's not valued economically. And if the wife isn't, if the wife isn't saying, I need you, husband, to go out and make some money because I want to stay home with my baby, then he doesn't have the motivation to go work for her, which takes away his motivation. Because what man is as motivated as he would be to have a young wife and a baby at home? What other scenario would make him as motivated as that? There's barely anything.
That's interesting. I don't think I've looked at it that way in terms of
Well, I've been
motivation.
looking at it that way. I'm a grandmother, right?
Yeah,
I'm
I
a
understand. I
grandmother.
understand that. I guess I'm one of those, yeah, old school feminists, but I do think we need to value uh, people who choose to have families, including women who
Yes.
stay at home. I think
Yeah,
the
I do
problem
too.
is, yeah, I think there's a lot of judgment towards it. I do also think that in the reality of our current environment, uh, it's very hard to sustain that on sustain life on one salary.
Oh, it is
And
now because people have gone back to work, both the husband and the wife. Everything costs more now. They just put the prices up for a two-income family.
and the
So yeah,
pressure
it's
is
much
very
harder.
high on the men as well to provide if you only have one income. And I see how difficult that can be. Um,
But also, you can go out of the city now and live because people work virtually now. So you don't have to actually live in the city. You
Dep-
can live in small
well, this
communities
depends on what
again.
kind of job you have. So, and this
True.
is where you kind of have the sort of the elite. Like, we have different lifestyles. If it's sort of like during the pandemic, you had people who are like, "Well, I get to work from home, and that's not so bad, right?" And then you have people who are like essential workers and or have jobs where, like, being in person is really really important. Those are different, like, they're experiencing that in a really different way.
Hmm.
So I think
Hmm.
that's important to consider.
Hmm.
And and it's the same thing with having, like, if you're wealthy, if you're earning a lot of money, then yes, the woman, can be it's not such a
Yes.
big strain, right?
Yeah.
Versus, the only thing is, I would say, I'm all for women and men choosing together how they want to arrange that. And I
Mhm.
have zero judgment for someone who decides to be, a stay-at-home mom of however many kids. I do think, because life situations do change, being able to have still something that you can do of your own, whether it's a divorce or your spouse passes away. I mean, all sorts of things can happen.
Well,
Um,
when I had my baby, my first baby, I guess maybe I was pregnant. I don't remember exactly where we were, but it was early in our marriage. And we had talked about the fact that I was going to stay home. And Jordan wanted me to stay home. We looked at it economically, and it was going to cost me so much to send the kid to daycare that it just didn't really
Yeah.
seem really worthwhile. I wasn't going to make very much. And we decided we would just live without magazines and telephones for a while because there weren't any cell phones. There was, nothing. There were microwaves. I think that was the only thing we had, maybe in
Sure.
dishwashers and washer and dryer. Like we had those things. But so we started that way. And I had a dream. I think this was just when I first got pregnant. So yeah, I had maybe just had a baby. She was still just a little baby because we moved before she was a year old. I had a dream about my grandmother, and I loved my grandmother. I love both my grandmothers, but my dad's mom played piano, stayed at home with the kids, and she just thought everyone thought that they were her favorite grandchild. So she made everybody think that they were the best, and so she was a fun person to know. And so I had a dream about her that I'd gone and looked in her closet and her shoes were there and I put her shoes on and they were a bit too small. Now, I had worked as a massage therapist before I got married. I'd got my university degree. I'd been working as a massage therapist, up till that point. And I was an artist. I wanted to go to art school. So I still had all of that yearning. And the shoes were too small. And I thought, what does that mean? That means that although I think I honor what my grandmother did, what she did was not enough for my time and place. And so I have to do other things. And I did. I stayed home and I painted portraits when my kids were really little. I had other little kids come in the house and play with my kids, and people paid me to do that. I moved to the States. I didn't have a green card. So that's how I got some money doing that under the table. And when we went back to Canada, I went back to art school when the kids were just starting school. So, I mean, it's not very long that I stayed home because kids they're only little for a little amount of time. Yeah. But I had to wrap my head around it. And I had a dream about it that yes, you'll stay home, but that's not enough these days. It's just not enough. There has to be more. There's going to be more.
And it's not, and I think we have to look at people as individuals, right? For someone, they could be this amazing stay-at-home mom who, has multiple kids, cooks beautiful meals, and and they get such satisfaction and fulfillment from that. I can understand that. That's not going to be me. But then you have this opportunity. Okay, you can do your art and you can do this, and then also have the time with your children, which is precious. And also the system, as you mentioned, is set up where it's very, I have a friend in this situation. She is basically, has been a stay-at-home mom for a few years now because just financially, it doesn't even make sense. She doesn't earn enough to really, be able to go off, and instead she's going to just miss time with her child. So it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But she also needs to be fulfilled artistically, and she's trying to find ways around. It is an intense kind of job because you're putting a lot of time into it. I mean, for her, her free time did evaporate. It's a constant. Look, I took over my sister had a puppy that they rescued, and I stayed with this puppy for just 3 or 4 days. And I felt like, because the puppy was so in need of attention all the time, it was just so demanding of my attention. I couldn't do anything. So I can only imagine. So I get it. It is, and also like the quality of it, right? You can educate your child, because they learn the best when they're so young. You can teach them languages. You have really precious time that you can spend in really positive ways that set them up for the future. And if you set them up for the future in a good way, you're also setting up society, because you're going to have somebody who's a valuable member of society be joining it. So there is a great deal of value to that. But as you said, there is also like that personal fulfillment, where you have to have that, and it looks different for different people. And it might just be entirely, you can't force somebody to feel differently about it. You can't mandate it. It's just.
And you wouldn't want to. We've made a lot of strides forward in allowing women to find a voice in society, and that's good. It's just that some how in that time we thought it was necessary to also turn them away from being a mother, but I don't think that was wise.
No, and I don't think everyone is meant to be a mother either. I think there are definitely some people who should never have kids, and they're not not fit for that. And also, I mean, the contributions, including women, many of these women were indeed mothers, but they've made like without women, you also wouldn't have a whole deal of inventions too. I think people don't realize how many. I think Wi-Fi was something that was invented by a woman and
Out of
developed
necessity.
medications. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that actually come from women. So this idea that if women's only role was to be, a mother and stay at
Yeah, but
home.
that can't be because it's a very short time.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
people think that this is the rest of their life. It's like, no, it wasn't. For me, it was from 1992 to 1998. That's not very long. Or 97. No, 98.
no. So
Yeah,
that's a pretty short.
that's how
Like
long
some
it
people
takes
stay
to have
forever,
a
right? They
couple of
never
kids.
go back and do
Yeah,
anything
that's
else.
their choice, but it's
Yeah.
not necessary because their kids have then gone to school. And then I went to university and I went between 9 and 4. So I could be home as soon as school was out. And I took them to school in the morning before I went. So, it was, I tried to make it work within what I wanted, with what I wanted to do and have a mother. I tried to make it work. And it was successful because I felt fulfilled I knew that a kid's sense of satisfaction was higher if they're in proximity to home. If they can easily get from home to wherever they're going, makes them happiest. So I thought, okay, well, they can go to the local school and I'll be home for lunch.
That's really
And
great.
I let them walk home. I didn't go get them. I thought they can
Yeah.
walk home and they can walk back to school. They don't need me to hold their hand, but I'll be there. And after school, and all the little kids that used to come over and play at the house and stuff, they weren't ever alone. And so they weren't under my feet at all. At all. When they were really, really little, I just put paints and paper down and they just played in the kitchen and took all
I also think
took
that
all
if
of
you
the plastic stuff out of the kitchen and spread it all over the place. And,
right.
you know,
Yeah. I also think that look, if you've decided to bring a life into the world,
right.
your primary responsibility then becomes to that life, so that child. So I knew that, that would be how I would look at it. If I had children, that would be my number one priority the moment that I began, that I've chosen that.
Yeah, I would like
And I
women
think
to at
that's
least
right.
think it through. Think it through. Is this a possibility? Is this something that would be? Is this something deep in my heart? And if it is, you only have a very short time to do this. So just do it.
I
There's the
think
rest of
6
your life.
years or
You
so
do the
is
rest of it.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable timeline versus, forever, which,
Yeah,
by the
that's
way,
just
some people
such a
do
lie.
advocate
That's
for,
such a
right?
lie.
Which
Who
it
could-
is.
who told us that? That's not true.
Well, unfortunately, there are definitely some people who very much advocate for that and see
That's
that as
called
the
an
role of women.
Oedipal mother who wants to eat her
Yeah.
children. She keeps them in her
Oh, but
basement.
there is that too.
Oh,
I
there
met
is
one of
that.
these
Yeah,
recently.
and run away from that as fast as you can.
I may have met one of these recently, but I'm going to self-censor myself.
I did too. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about that at all.
Yeah, it happens. It does not result in a positive outcome. I also think like helicopter parents, I mean,
Yeah.
there has to be there's a difference between when you're there for when it's like a little child, right? And you
Yeah.
should be there. You continue being there as a parent that they can come to, that can guide them.
Yeah.
But I think this kind of idea, this is my Eastern European background speaking, because I see like North American parents just be so like everything the kid does is amazing. And there's all these movies, like you can't miss a single game because then you're a bad parent. I'm like, no, you're a parent who is actually trying to provide for your child, for your family. Sometimes you're going to miss a baseball game, and it's a baseball game. Like, it's not the end of the world. My parents did not attend anything of mine.
No, mine neither.
Sometimes it's sad, but it's like, it's not,
Yeah,
but I also
sometimes it is.
understand why. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I probably could have had a little more encouragement in my family, but at least I've come to terms with that, and I know that I could have, and I tried to give more love and attention to my kids and to my grandkids. So, you just try to learn from whatever mistakes have been made and do better, but that's about all you can do.
Yeah.
But
And
I
you
love,
realize
and
parents
my,
are
and my
figuring it out.
husband, he would just light up when he came home and saw those kids. And he would say that at the end of the day, when he'd come home, he'd think, oh, I'm home. Yay. That's great. That's great if you can do that for someone, even just one other person. I think that's great. We didn't live around any relatives, right? So there weren't any aunts and uncles and grandparents or anything. It was just him and I. And also, I was 30 when I had my first child, so we didn't know anybody with children because he was in the university and there were no children there. And so I was the only one who convinced my husband that I wanted to have a baby. And I think I waited 4 years longer than I wanted to when I had the first one. Because I was sure I wanted a baby. I wasn't sure I wanted a husband, but I wanted
You
a
have
baby
two.
for sure.
You have two kids, right?
I have two. I have a son.
Yeah.
I have a son, and he's got two kids as well. Two little
My mom
kids.
ended up with three,
Oh yeah, good for her. My
but
sister too.
well, we have a very big age gap, but I think she also
Right.
people change, their priorities change. In her case, I mean, she
Yeah.
definitely wanted one, but she was an only child. I think she felt a bit
Mm.
lonely in that way.
Yeah, I was an only child. My sister was 5 years older than me. How young were your siblings from you?
So my sister is 14 years younger than me,
Oh
and my
yeah,
brother
you're an
is
only child too,
oh,
then.
12 and 14. Yeah, exactly.
Oh
That's right.
yeah, wow. Your mom must have been like a very young woman when she had
She was
you.
23 when she gave birth to me.
Wow.
But it was much more common then. It was like a normal thing. And
Mm.
and of course then
Well, I'm
when you
thinking,
get to
wow,
that age,
your siblings. She was in her 30s,
30s.
mid 30s, right?
Yeah. But that's where you think about when I got to that age I realized how young, really how if I look at myself, okay, this is how it was when I was 22, 23. And then you realize, well, your parents don't know anything. They're just figuring things out. Now, they were
Yeah,
more mature because they were made more mature by life because of the situation and
yeah,
having to
that's
get
right.
out of the Soviet
That's how
Union.
you
But
grow up quick.
yeah, exactly. But nonetheless, they were still young. They didn't know everything and they were
But you
trying to
don't, no
do.
matter what age you have a baby, you don't have a clue. Really, you
No.
don't. You think you should, but you don't know anything. And it's
So you
pretty
understand the
wild.
mistakes a little more. And so
It's
you
pretty
can
wild.
be more forgiving. And then with my
Yes.
siblings, it was quite different. Like the way that they were, like it was different how they raised us, completely different in many ways. Um, but I mean, I'm okay with how I was because I I had the experience and it made me who I am today.
Me
And
too. Yeah.
I think I'm less spoiled.
They thought I was super spoiled because I was the youngest, and they were all three, 5 and 6 years older than me, or no, let's see, 4, 7 and 8 years older than me. So they kind of grew up as a tribe, and then I came along later. So they thought I was spoiled, and maybe I
I
was.
think
I don't care.
maybe. I think that's what a spoiled person would say. I don't care.
That's right.
Yeah, for me, I felt like I was. I bet that I benefited from more of a certain kind of attention. I think they treated me more like an adult,
Uh huh.
and I think they also, because they were trying to figure it out, but I was also the first. I think there was a different kind of engagement
Hmm.
versus later. It's just different. And then growing up in a different environment, like I grew up, obviously Soviet Union wasn't a great place, weren't wealthy, and then come to Israel with nothing because you had to give everything away to get out. And then, not having anything there either for many years. And my parents really struggled. I mean, in ways that, because they're pretty educated, and I guess that's a privilege. It is a privilege, and they're smart. My mom is a biochemist, and my dad is they're both retired, but my dad was a studied like electrophysics,
Hmm.
and then taught himself how to code, so he became a computer engineer later on.
Oh wow.
But
Yeah. Smart.
he worked really hard and he was smart, but is smart. But but they also had to do very embarrassing work. I
Mm-hmm.
won't say it just because I don't know how they feel about it, but it's like it was menial labor, and
Mm-hmm.
humiliating, and didn't get treated well, and that has I think a profound effect. And then seeing that also has an effect, and then moving again to Canada, also again, kind of starting over with everything, language, financially, and living in really, really modest means. Um, I think that gave me a different appreciation for things. And I think it was, while that was not always pleasant, I think it was good for me. Um, I think, I like little luxuries like now, right? I enjoy things, but it's my parents calling you.
No, it's my husband calling me.
Okay.
Oh, I know what. I can turn that off. Ha.
Ah. Technology. I made you hang up on your husband. That's I don't know how I feel about that. My claim to fame.
Yeah.
Um, no, but it was something that I think benefited me in terms of, like, I appreciate really good things when I get them, and I
Mm-hmm.
have a genuine appreciation for them. I don't take them for granted, and I
Mm-hmm.
can also understand, like, I don't have that entitlement to having a certain
Mm-hmm.
standard of life, and
Mm-hmm.
even though I
Mm-hmm.
like nice things, why not?
What would your advice be to for young people who are trying to start in journalism or art or science or any of these endeavors that are trying to find their own path?
I think my biggest piece of advice, because, okay, so I started out as a deeply shy person, very scared, lots of social anxiety. Still have all of that, by the way. But the reason that I think I was successful, because I was successful very early. Like, I was publishing my first paid article. I was 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
Um,
That is
yeah,
early.
and I created my own, like, website that was pretty popular also when I was still a teenager. And then I was being published by these really big papers and magazines when I was, 18, 19. They didn't know that, right? I hid that. But the reason that I was able to do that wasn't because I was necessarily so good and so overwhelmingly talented and skilled that they couldn't say no.
Besides that, uh-huh.
Well, I don't, if I look at my writing then, my writing, hopefully I've improved, right? It's, but what it was is that I did it, is that I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
afraid. The rejection doesn't mean that much. All it means, they didn't like your idea. It means that not right now. And and this is actually advice my mom gave me. That's a really good advice.
Mm-hmm.
Don't turn yourself down before somebody else has had a chance to. And
Oh,
people
that's
do
very
that.
nice.
It's really good, right? And
Mm-hmm.
people do that all the time. They say no, this idea isn't going to work, or somebody's going to reject me, and so they don't pursue it. It's their excuse for not pursuing it. But you are never going to get a yes unless you ask. And so that's my
Mm-hmm.
advice for young people, or anybody really who wants to do something that maybe seems like it's challenging, or it's a pie in the sky kind of idea. Just try it. The worst thing that's going to happen is somebody's going to say no, and then, okay, they said no. It's like, you can deal with it. You can recover from a no. You can't recover from knowing that you haven't tried,
Yeah,
and then you
that's
just
right.
keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's good advice. Thanks to your mom. That's
Yeah.
good advice.
She has it every once in a while.
Yeah, isn't that nice?
It is. And I think it is something where I wonder how many ideas didn't fail but weren't ever pursued, that
Yeah,
could have had a profoundly positive effect on our world.
yeah. Well, I imagine there's lots of those out there. There's lots of those
Yeah.
out there. So if we can even just get, just start with one. See where it goes.
Yeah.
See where
And the
it
way you
goes.
get stronger is, like I said, I started at crippling shyness, and I'm doing public speaking now, and, in public, and all that kind of stuff why? Because it's a muscle, and
So how do you get the courage to go up on stage and speak?
I'm motivated by what I want to say,
Yeah.
and it's the same, or what I want to achieve. Like anything that I've done that I've been scared of, I've done it. I pushed through. Like I used to have, I'd be in a classroom or in a lecture, and I'm shaking, but I have my hand up. My
Mm.
motivation
Mm.
is I want to know the answer to this. I'm
Mm.
curious. I want to have this engagement. So know what it is that motivates you, and then do whatever scares you regardless. And I've done now so many things that scared me, and
Yeah.
I didn't think I'd get through, and I did. And sometimes it does go as badly as you imagine it in your head. That happens also. But you'll also surprise yourself, and you'll surprise yourself in negative ways, but you'll also surprise yourself in positive ways. There are things that I never knew about myself that I only discovered in the process of taking like massive risks. I
Mm.
never thought, I'd write this book. I never thought I'd, again, do any of the things that I'm doing right now. It was not something I wanted. It wasn't something that I thought out, that I, imagined in myself in that. I was the one asking the questions far more than answering the questions. So, and then I discovered through the process of doing that there's a part of me that's like, yeah, has been sort of buried. And I would not know that if I hadn't taken certain risks in my life.
I think of a knight on a horse facing a dragon, because you talk about fear being motivating and going towards the fear. And that dragon hoards something, right? Hoards the diamond or the treasure of some sort or other. So that's a hero's journey. Yeah.
It
Right?
is.
That's a hero's journey.
Yeah,
That's
I
very
didn't
cool.
think of it in that framing, but you're right. It is a hero's journey, which I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about here, but
I don't
I
know why
recently, all right.
not.
Well, I recently went on this event for, it was like a conversation about psychedelics, actually.
Oh yeah. Oh right. Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty fascinating. It's funny because when I read the invitation, it said something about desserts, and I wasn't sure what that meant. As like, is this code word, or that I should know, or is this an actual discussion? Turned out to be, it really was a really great discussion. And but I was just thinking, like, the reason that sometimes psychedelics work in these like very profound ways where they help people deal is because often the reason that people are depressed or have PTSD and these kinds of issues or addictions because they have unresolved trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
to resolve that trauma, well, literally, if you take, it's called the hero's journey, the hero's journey dose. If you take a large enough dose, I actually haven't, but I speak from like research, but um, but part of why I imagine that it works so well for some people is that they go on a hero's journey, they face whatever it is, that's because it's not always a pleasant experience, right? It can be a very challenging experience, but because they've now faced it, it resolves their issue, and so they never have to kind of do it again. And you can do it without resorting necessarily to psychedelics. You can do it by basically taking a hero's journey, or maybe even many little hero's journeys, by doing things that scare you, or
Yeah.
tackling things that have been the source of your trauma. Like the way that I've had some trauma in my life, and the way that I've dealt with it is ultimately, I was never able to move past it until I really faced it hand on, and now it doesn't trouble me the way that it used to.
When you
And
say you
it's,
faced it hands on, what do you mean? Just admitted what you'd gone through, or?
I think in my case, all I needed with one particular trauma is to admit what feelings it did,
Mm.
that it happened, what feelings it invoked in me,
Mm-hmm.
and it actually proved to be sufficient to really destroy the hold that it had on me. But people's going to have different, experiences and needs when it comes to that.
Yeah.
And some things, I think some things I'm still dealing with, but, and little experiences that, as a child that might have had, like the trauma from the dance, not the trauma. Well, in a way it was too. That's not what I was alluding to, but there is a level of that too. The embarrassment that I felt had actually had a significant aspect, or a significant impact on the rest of my life. But when I'm able to talk about it freely and tell people or say, I had these incidents, like I had a lot of bullying, for example, as a child and as a teenager, I feel ashamed of that, or felt ashamed of that for many years. And so I wouldn't talk about it because, I want to seem cool. I don't want to expose that I'm such a loser that people, that's the self-talk. And then when you get to a point where you can share that, at least with your, you don't need to share that with everyone, but share it with the people who you trust, who you trust to have your best interest in mind and who you want to connect with. It frees you from that. It frees you from the shackles because they hear about it and they're like, but it's fine, right? You remain the same relationship. And in fact, you get closer because you're not hiding your authentic experiences or your authentic self from them. Yeah. And this is also, it connects to why people should speak freely the things that they think or believe, is because if we don't, then we don't have authentic relationships with others around us.
And we can't grow.
We can't grow, and we don't trust. It shows that we also don't trust them to see our real selves.
Yeah, right. Where do you live now? Can I ask you that?
I still live in Coast? Yeah, I still live in the West Coast. Yes,
on the West Coast.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll run into each other sometime. That'd be fun.
I would love that. I think it would be very interesting.
Do you have anything
I'd love
else
to see
you'd
your
like
art.
to end with? Because I've run out of things to say, or time, or brain power. I don't know which.
All of it. You got tired of talking to me. I get it.
No, I'm not getting tired of talking.
I'm kidding. I'm just. I know what you mean. I was on a podcast recently where the person, while it was a great conversation, the person literally went through every single chapter in my book.
Oh yeah.
And when I realized he was going to do that, I was a little.
I never do that. I'm not. I don't know. I'm not obsessive enough or something.
No, nor am I. I appreciated that he did that and he prepared that. I really appreciated and respected that. And he's a very, interesting person, very accomplished. But so I was deeply flattered by that. But also, there was a point in which I think in the middle of it, I'm like, so are you going to go through every chapter? And you kind of got what I was getting at because. It would take so long. I think people would lose interest. And honestly, there is a point where you hit your wall, and I was getting pretty close to it.
I think I figured out just now not just now, but in the last week on Audible, if you're listening to a book, you can hit clips and bookmarks, and then you can make a clip, and then you can turn it on, and then you can just write notes right inside the app. So you can write really long notes. And then you can go back to clips and you can edit the notes, or you can edit the clips, or you can read the notes. Yeah, which I didn't do this time, but I bet I had a whole bunch in there.
Wow. Oh, that's funny. So did you listen to my book? Is that how you read it? Listening?
No, I don't remember. I don't remember. No, it's probably not because I'm traveling all the time. So it would have been digital, either Kindle or Audible.
That makes sense. For me, which one. I made the Audible a little bit later, and I wasn't sure if it was even worth doing. And
I always think it's. I like it. I like Audible.
That's good.
Oh yeah, for sure. Sometimes I have the patience to read on digital, and sometimes I have the patience to listen, and so I just do one or the other.
I should probably.
And then I usually put it on both. Right, I put it on both so I can kind of decide which one I want to.
I like reading generally because of how my brain works. I like to think, reflect, and pause.
Yeah. Well, that's why I like writing down what I hear, because I think I can remember it better if I just write down what I hear. Because then it's visual and I can read it and I can hear it. And that's good.
I had an acting teacher who made me write down like I think it was like a monologue or a speech or something like that. And I hate writing physically, it pains me, but he said that it gets you closer to the words. And it kind of hit me why he said that. When you're writing it down word for word, what's happening is that it's almost as if you're writing the thought, and it makes you understand it better. And I thought
Yeah.
that was really interesting when you
And how
experience
crafted
that in a
it
physical
is,
way.
how
Yeah,
crafted it
yeah.
is. Because I'll often, if I really want to get down what somebody said, I'll repeat that, listening to that. I won't listen to it at such a slow pace that it's painful. I'll listen to it at a pace that I can stand, but I'll re-listen to it. I'll re-listen a paragraph until I have it. I may listen to it over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And really, so by the time I have it written down, I know the paragraph.
That's, it's a little bit how I approach writing. One thing that I get that people seem to like about my writing is that I'll take something that might seem pretty complex on the surface and I'll reduce it to something very simple, and while retaining nuance. And it's because I will sit with something for a very long time until I have that grasp of it myself and I can simplify it. So it's how I listen to things or read things as well. So just then it appears that way in my writing.
Yeah.
And then I'm
Well, right
working on
now
getting
I'm
more
I'm
humor.
taking. Oh, my son has an app that it's a writing app that I haven't really put it to much use yet, and so I'm going to take all the writing that I've done over the last year and put it on there and see if I can make heads or tails of it. So we'll see.
That should be interesting. That should be
Yeah, we'll
interesting.
see. Or
You
it'll
do
be.
remember things better when you write them down. So I'm
That's
trying to
right.
do better on that.
And
And
I kind of
some
like to see where I've come in a year,
yeah.
and that'll tell me. Because other than that, I won't look at it or read it.
Well,
But
that's
writing is
great.
a. Oh, and I was talking to a priest yesterday, just for fun.
Okay. Of
Just
course,
for
as you
fun.
do.
Oh, it was kind of funny because he's Mexican and he's in Newfoundland, and he showed me a picture outside and it's snowing and raining. And he was like, I don't know why I was sent here. I hope I don't have to stay here long. But he doesn't know because he's been sent there and he just goes where he's sent. But yeah, he told me, he said, "Do you paint and draw?" I said, "Yes." And then he said, "You're supposed to be writing." And I was like, "Oh my goodness." He said, "You have lots of gifts that you have to do." I thought, yeah,
That's the thing. Sometimes we get so many gifts and then so little time. And then you
yeah,
have to figure out which gifts you focus on. And
yeah.
that can be really tough because you're like, oh my God, I have these other things. Like I write music and I sing and
Oh,
I
you
don't
write
really
music and you
pursue that.
sing. Oh, I like to
Yeah.
sing. Oh, that's
Oh,
fun.
maybe we'll do
We could
we'll
do
start a
that.
band, okay?
Well, we Jordan and I with a musician, with a few musicians, we wrote, and Jordan wrote the words and sang. We sang 9 songs that we're going to put out last year, and we
Oh,
really had a
really?
good time. So we'd like to do more of that.
Oh,
We did
that
it up at the
sounds
lake
fun.
when we were up at the lake in the summer.
What
So
kind of
it was
music?
fun. Oh, all kinds of music. All kinds of music. One was a punk rock song. One was kind of a circus song. Some of it's kind of bluesy, like all kinds of.
I'm so curious to hear that, really, truly.
Yeah, I really want to put it out because it was so much fun to do, and I want to do another one. And I know now from experience that if you don't finish it and just get it out there, you don't do another one. So
Exactly.
we have
I
to
think
finish it.
perfection is the enemy,
Yeah.
which I have struggled against for many years. It's better that's how things die for sure. I will say one, I will up your pre-story with a Dalai Lama story and then we can
Okay.
end on that
Okay.
because
Okay.
it somehow relates. So I had a chance to ask the Dalai Lama a few questions when I was very young. I was still in university.
Mm.
And and I wasted my question because everyone else had all these political questions to ask. And I was just like, so how do you listen better?
That would be my question these days. Yeah,
Would
good one.
it? So
Mhm.
so maybe people didn't hate me as much for asking the question as I thought they might, but his answer, I'll combine with his answer. There was also a rabbi there, so both of them had to built it on each other's. But essentially, it's like the problem is not to listen. The problem is you need to process, and you need to not just process or hear something. You need to reflect on it, and you need to sit with it, and then
Mm.
you need to put it into your life in some way, or it vanishes. And so that's what I was left with.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. So you kept that with you. Eh? That's a
I
good one.
kept that with me, and I've reflected on it. And there's a few other things I sort of took away from my experience with him, but it's definitely, to me, we need to really listen. This is where we sort of lack as a society. I think often is that we don't truly listen to each other and really hear each other and reflect and assume goodwill, because we need to, in order
Yeah,
to really hear each other.
right. Why, thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Thanks so much
Very
for
nice.
having
And
me.
I thought that I was on the wrong time zone, and then and so I thought I had an hour. So I plugged in my phone and I shut my eyes for I don't know how very many minutes, and then I got a phone call. So I thought, oh well, I got a little bit of rest. I came back, sat down, so that was
It
good.
worked.
It worked. Yeah, it worked.
Thank you.
Thank you.